I used to believe that disappearing was the only way to save myself. For months, I lived like a ghost, quiet, forgotten, erased from the life I once built. My husband thought he had finally won. He thought my absence meant surrender, that I would never return to the home we once shared, or confront the truth he tried so hard to bury. But he didn't know what I learned while I was gone. He didn't know what I found, or the pieces of my life he never expected me to pick up. I saw things I wasn't supposed to see, things that twisted the story I'd been told for years. And once the shock faded, something colder replaced it. Something steadier. A determination that surprised even me. People say revenge changes a person, but in my case, it brought me back to myself. I returned not as the woman he used to control, but as someone who finally understood what he had taken from me, and what I needed to take back. He thought I had vanished for good. But the truth is, I was preparing for the one moment he'd never see coming. And when it arrived, I made sure he had nothing left to hide behind. Are you ready to hear how I took back everything he stole? Before everything fell apart, my life looked deceptively simple from the outside. I wasn't wealthy or extraordinary, but I had carved out a world that felt steady, predictable in the best way. I worked a modest job at a small design firm, spending most of my days surrounded by sketches, color palettes, and the soft hum of creative chaos. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I took pride in every project, every client who trusted me to help bring their vision to life. At home, things seemed peaceful. My husband and I had built what looked like a stable marriage: routine breakfasts, shared grocery lists, occasional weekends out when our schedules allowed. To anyone watching, we appeared functional, even content. I convinced myself that was enough. After all, who was I to expect a life full of fireworks or grand romance? Stability felt safer, easier, and I had learned long ago not to ask too many questions when things were fine. But looking back, the warning signs were always there, subtle, almost invisible moments that I dismissed as exhaustion or stress. His sudden late nights at work, his distracted half-smiles, the way he'd scroll through his phone with a tight grip, turning the screen away when I walked by. I told myself every couple went through phases. Every marriage had quiet seasons. Every partner deserved privacy. I believed that because I wanted to, because the truth was harder to face. My daily life continued with its gentle rhythm. Morning coffee on the balcony, walks through the neighborhood where I could clear my head, evenings spent cooking simple dinners, waiting for him to come home. When he'd arrive late, offering vague excuses about deadlines or last-minute meetings, I accepted them without pushing. I thought trust meant not questioning the person you loved. It never occurred to me that trust could be used as a weapon. On weekends, I focused on myself: yoga classes, thrift shops, trips to the library where I'd lose myself in novels about women who found their strength when the world pushed them to the edge. I didn't know I would become one of them soon enough. I didn't know life was preparing me for something I couldn't yet see. Friends occasionally hinted that something felt off. They'd ask if I was okay, if my marriage was going well, if he seemed different. I always laughed it off, insisting everything was normal. The truth was, I was too afraid to look closely. When you're comfortable, even in a lukewarm life, the idea of upheaval feels unbearable. You cling to routine like it's a lifeline. But beneath the surface of my quiet days, something was shifting. Small cracks formed, barely noticeable, but impossible to ignore once they appeared. There were moments when I'd catch him staring at me with an expression I couldn't read, something cold, distant. Moments when our conversations felt rehearsed, like he was choosing every word carefully. And then there was the house. Our home, my supposed sanctuary. Over time, it felt less like a shared space and more like a stage he performed on. Rooms that once felt warm became strangely unfamiliar. Drawers moved. Papers missing. Items relocated without explanation. He dismissed my concerns with a laugh, telling me I was more forgetful these days. I believed him, because it was easier than questioning the alternative. Still, a quiet unease settled in my chest, soft at first, like a whisper I could ignore. But whispers grow louder when the truth is trying to break through. Looking back now, I realize that life rarely unravels all at once. It frays slowly, thread by thread, until you finally tug on the wrong corner and everything collapses.
I didn't understand it then.
I was still living in the illusion of normalcy, still convincing myself that the life I had built was secure. But the cracks were forming. The shadows were lengthening. Something was coming, something that would shatter the version of my life I held onto so tightly. And when it arrived, nothing would ever be the same again. Because the moment I discovered the truth, the woman I used to be disappeared. And the woman who took her place was someone my husband never saw coming. The day everything shifted didn't begin with drama. It started quietly, the way life does when it's about to blindside you. I remember waking up before the sun, the house unusually still. My husband had already left for work, or at least that's what he claimed in the note he left on the counter. The handwriting felt rushed, unfamiliar, almost like it wasn't meant for me at all. Something in my chest tightened, but I pushed the feeling aside. I brewed coffee, sat by the window, and tried to settle into my morning routine. But my thoughts kept circling back to that note, to the strangeness of it. My instincts whispered that something wasn't right, and for once, I didn't silence them. I walked into his office, a room I rarely entered. It always felt like his domain, a space he guarded with subtle intensity. But that morning, a strange bravery pushed me forward. I opened drawers he'd told me never to touch, expecting nothing more than a few documents or old receipts. Instead, I found a second phone. Not his main one. Not even a replacement. A hidden one, tucked beneath a stack of tax folders, as if he believed I'd never think to look. My hands trembled as I held it, its weight far heavier than its physical mass. A phone like that only existed for secrets. And secrets meant betrayal. I stared at the blank screen, a mix of dread and determination rising inside me. I tried the passcode combinations I knew, birthdays, anniversaries, numbers tied to our shared life. None worked. But then I remembered something he once said years ago, back when affection still lived between us. He used a particular number during stressful times because it was easy to remember. I typed it in. The phone unlocked. The rush of adrenaline nearly knocked the air out of me. I scrolled through the messages slowly at first, then faster, painfully aware that each new piece of information tightened the knot forming in my stomach. There were pictures,
Plans.
reservations, transfers of money I'd never known existed, conversations with a woman whose name I had never heard before, but whose presence was suddenly everywhere. She wasn't just someone he flirted with. She wasn't just a temporary distraction. She was someone he was building a life with, a life that was supposed to be mine. As the messages continued, the truth became clearer. They had been planning for months. They discussed selling assets, moving money, and preparing for a future that didn't include me. One message in particular made my hands go numb. He referred to me as a temporary obstacle and reassured her that soon everything will be taken care of. I felt gutted. My home, my marriage, my identity, everything suddenly felt like a performance staged without my knowledge. I had been living in the background of my own life, unaware that he was rewriting the script.
But the shock didn't paralyze me.
It awakened something deeper, something fierce. I placed the phone back exactly where I found it, careful not to leave a trace. If he wanted to play games behind my back, then I would learn the rules and beat him on his own. That was the day my life split into two parts, before the betrayal and after. The days that followed became an exercise in quiet observation. I watched him more closely than ever, studying his patterns, memorizing his habits. He grew bolder, leaving clues around the house as if he believed I would never question him. That arrogance became my greatest advantage. He left early, came home late, took calls outside, locked himself in the office for hours, assuming I was too naive or too gentle to probe further. But what he didn't realize was that everything he had only sharpened my clarity. I began documenting everything. Every transaction. Every suspicious disappearance. Every time he claimed to be one place but was clearly in another. I followed the trail like a detective, peeling back layers of deceit until I uncovered the truth beneath it all. And then came the discovery that changed everything. One evening, while he was out meeting a client, I found a manila envelope shoved behind a row of books on his shelf. Inside were documents, legal forms, contracts, and arrangements that I had unknowingly signed months earlier. Signatures that looked like mine but weren't. My home, our shared accounts, and even my retirement funds had been slowly rerouted, rewritten, and reassigned. Piece by piece, he had been stripping away everything I owned. He hadn't just betrayed me emotionally, he was preparing to destroy me financially, socially, and legally. When he was done, I wouldn't just lose the marriage. I would lose everything. But the cruelest part wasn't the deception. It was realizing he believed I wasn't smart enough to uncover it. He had underestimated me so deeply that he didn't even bother hiding the evidence well. And that was his first mistake. Instead of confronting him, I vanished. Not physically, not yet. But emotionally, mentally,
Strategically.
I became quieter, calmer, more predictable, allowing him to believe everything was still under his control. If anything, he thought I had become more submissive, more dependent, as if his manipulation had weakened me. But I was planning. I met with lawyers, financial advisors, anyone who could help me untangle the web he'd spun. I collected proof, securing copies of every document he forged. I opened a separate account. I tracked down hidden assets he had kept under shell names. Everything he tried to take from me, I quietly reclaimed. Then came the night that forced everything into motion. He arrived home unusually early. I heard his footsteps down the hall, heavy and uneven, like he'd had one drink too many or one lie too few. Something in his posture was off, like he was agitated, unsettled. When he disappeared into the office, I followed silently and watched from the hallway. He tore through drawers, flipped through papers, slammed cabinets shut with a force I had never seen. He was looking for something, and I knew exactly what it was. The missing documents, the missing trail, the missing leverage he thought he had over me. His panic was the confirmation I needed. He knew the game was shifting and he didn't know why. But I did. The next morning I left. Not in a dramatic way, no packed suitcases or slamming doors. I simply walked out before dawn with a small bag and the knowledge that I was finally taking control. I disappeared from the house, from his routines, from his assumptions. For the first time, he didn't know where I was or what I was doing. That terrified him more than any confrontation ever could. During my time away, I built my plan piece by piece. I gathered evidence he never expected me to find. I strengthened my support system. I unraveled everything he had plotted until his entire scheme lay in front of me, exposed and powerless. Each new discovery fueled my resolve, turning pain into purpose and betrayal into strategy. And then, after waiting long enough for him to believe I was truly gone, I came back. But not as the woman he once controlled. I returned as someone he could no longer manipulate, someone armed with every truth he tried to bury. The rising action of my story didn't end with betrayal. It ended with preparation. Preparation for the moment he would realize everything he built on lies was about to collapse around him. And the greatest twist was still ahead, because he never saw how far I'd go to take back what was mine. He thought I had disappeared for good. But he had no idea what I had become while I was gone. And what I was preparing to do next would turn his life inside out. The moment I chose to return wasn't accidental. I waited until everything was perfectly aligned, until the documents were secured, the account stabilized, the lawyers prepared, and every piece of evidence had been arranged like the final strokes of a painting. I wanted him cornered. I wanted him to feel the ground shift under his feet the same way it had shifted under mine the day I found that second phone. I arrived at the house just after dusk, when the light was fading and the air carried that strange stillness that comes before a storm. I stood outside the front door for a long moment, breathing in the scent of a world that once felt like mine. Every memory pressed against me. The mornings I spent making coffee in the kitchen, the late nights folding laundry, the quiet hopes I whispered into the walls. But those memories no longer held power. They were shadows. Ghosts of a woman I no longer was. When I finally stepped inside, the house was dim, except for the soft glow coming from his office. His silhouette moved back and forth behind the frosted glass like a trapped animal. I walked slowly, deliberately, each step echoing across the floor. With every footfall, I felt years of silence breaking apart inside me. I stopped in the doorway and watched him. He didn't notice me at first. He was too consumed by the chaos he had created. Papers were scattered everywhere, drawers pulled open, folders overturned. He was unraveling, and I had never seen him so undone. Then he finally looked up and saw me. And the shock that washed over his face was the moment my entire plan locked into place. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Everything he ever tried to hide was written in his expression: fear, guilt, desperation. For the first time, he understood that I wasn't supposed to be here. In his mind, I was already out of the picture, erased from the life he had been crafting behind my back. I stepped further into the office, letting the silence thicken until it felt almost suffocating. My heart hammered not with fear, but with an icy clarity. I had spent months grieving the death of the marriage I thought I had. But this moment, this was the burial. I placed the folder on his desk, the one containing copies of every contract he forged, every bank transfer he hid, every message he sent to the woman he thought he'd build a future with. I watched him scan the pages, his face turning paler with each line he read. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff he didn't realize existed until he felt the wind beneath him. Inside the silence, I finally allowed myself to feel everything: the betrayal, the humiliation, the anger that had once swallowed me whole. But layered beneath it all was something unexpected: strength. A solid, unshakable strength that came from no longer waiting for him to give me answers, truth, or closure. He didn't control the story anymore. I did. When he reached the final document, proof that his hidden accounts were frozen, his forged signatures exposed, his financial schemes invalidated, he lifted his head and stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. And, in a way, he was. The woman who once lived in fear of losing him no longer existed. The woman standing before him had nothing left to lose, and everything to reclaim. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to argue or justify. I simply let him sit in the truth he had built with his own deception. Watching him crumble was not the triumph I expected, but it was the closure I needed. I walked through the house, room by room, collecting the last pieces of my life. Not clothes or keepsakes, those no longer mattered. I took the documents proving I held the rights to the property. The keys to the safe he thought only he could access. The final evidence my lawyer needed to finalize the separation and ensure he walked away with nothing. By the time I reached the front door again, the weight that had lived in my chest for months was gone. I felt strangely calm, as if releasing the past had opened a space inside me I didn't know I needed. But the true climax of my revenge wasn't walking away with proof of his downfall. It was what came next. I turned back toward him one last time. He stood in the hallway, frozen, surrounded by the ruins of his own actions. And in that heavy, breathless moment, I realized he finally understood what it felt like to lose control, because I had taken the one thing he never expected me to reclaim: my power. I stepped outside into the cool night air, closing the door behind me with a certainty that rippled through every part of who I was. The house that once held my fears no longer held me. I walked down the driveway, as if I were walking out of a cage I hadn't realized I'd been living in. I didn't look back. Not because I didn't care, but because I no longer needed to. Everything I had uncovered, everything I had reclaimed, everything he had tried to steal from me was now in my hands. The evidence would do the rest. His schemes would collapse. His plans would implode. His carefully constructed double life would soon be exposed to every person connected to him. And he would have no one to blame but himself. But as I reached the end of the street, I felt something even more powerful than victory. I felt free. And I knew, deep in my bones, that this wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of the part where I finally rebuilt the life he tried to take from me. The part where I decide who I become next. The part where he learns just how much destruction a single betrayal can unleash. And the part where the final consequences of his actions come crashing down, because the climax wasn't my return. The real climax was what happened after I walked away. And he had no idea what was coming for him next. Walking away from the house that night felt like the final step of a journey I never asked to take. For months, I'd lived with a weight pressing against my chest. Fear, betrayal, shame, confusion. Emotions that had seeped into every part of my life. But as I headed down the quiet street, that weight loosened, piece by piece, until I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time.
Control. Calm. Clarity.
Revenge doesn't always arrive as a dramatic explosion. Sometimes it comes in quiet moments, in the subtle shift from being the hunted to becoming the one who decides the direction of her own story. For me, the true resolution didn't happen in a single confrontation. It unfolded in the days and weeks that followed, as the consequences of his choices finally caught up to him. The evidence I had gathered moved swiftly. The forged signatures, the financial schemes, the secret accounts, every detail I had painstakingly uncovered revealed itself like dominoes falling in perfect formation. The lawyers took over the process, turning his years of deception into a series of unavoidable truths. He tried to fight back, of course. He tried to deny, to blame, to twist the narrative the same way he had twisted the boundaries of our marriage. But lies collapse when they have nothing left to cling to. Slowly, the life he had constructed behind my back began to disintegrate. His hidden accounts were frozen. The assets he'd planned to funnel away slipped out of his control. The relationship he'd built with another woman cracked under the pressure of exposure. In his attempt to ruin me, he had unknowingly crafted a trap that closed around him instead. And as he scrambled to hold on to something, anything, I watched from a distance with a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Because the truth is, revenge doesn't come without its own shadows. There were moments when I questioned myself, moments when I wondered if I had gone too far, or if reclaiming my power meant losing parts of myself along the way. But healing is never clean, and justice is never gentle. The impact of everything that happened didn't settle all at once. It arrived gradually, like waves reshaping a shoreline. Some days, I felt fierce and unbreakable, proud of myself for standing up against a man who had underestimated me for so long. Other days, the reality of what I'd endured hit harder. The years I spent believing our life was stable, the moments I ignored my intuition, the parts of myself I had silenced to maintain a peace that was never real. Yet each wave washed away a little more of the pain, and in its place, new strength began to grow. I moved into a smaller space. Nothing extravagant, nothing dramatic, just a quiet apartment with warm light and windows that overlooked a street filled with life. For the first time in years, I decorated without considering someone else's preferences. I cooked meals I enjoyed. I filled shelves with books I wanted to read. I reclaimed the simple joys I had set aside for the sake of a marriage built on false foundations. And as I rebuilt myself, I realized something important. Revenge hadn't consumed me the way I feared it might. Instead, it has clarified my boundaries. It had forced me to confront not just what he had done, but what I had allowed myself to tolerate. It taught me the value of listening to my instincts, the quiet signals I once brushed aside because they didn't fit the narrative I wanted to believe. It taught me that leaving isn't a weakness. In many ways, it is the most powerful act a person can choose. And it taught me that justice doesn't always look like punishment. Sometimes justice looks like freedom. As word of his downfall spread through his circles, I heard fragments, whispers about lost respect, damaged reputation, consequences he never expected to face. But I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. In truth, I didn't need to. His destruction wasn't my triumph. My triumph was stepping into a life no longer defined by his lies. I found myself reflecting on the countless others who had experienced betrayal like mine. People who gave everything, time, trust, loyalty, only to be met with deceit. People who stayed silent because they believed their pain wasn't loud enough to matter. People who convinced themselves the unease they felt was just stress, or exhaustion, or imagination. I used to be one of them. But my story became proof, if only to myself, that silence is not safety. Intuition is not paranoia. And courage rarely arrives as a roar. Sometimes it whispers quietly, urging you to take one small step at a time until the path out of the darkness becomes clear. When everything finally settled, when the legal battles closed, when the financial damage was undone, when he was left with the consequences of his own choices, I realized I no longer needed revenge to fuel me. I no longer needed anger as armor. The cycle had completed itself. What remained was me. A different version, perhaps. A wiser one. A stronger one. A woman forged from the fire of betrayal, but not defined by it. And as I rebuilt my life piece by piece, I found something unexpectedly beautiful. Peace. Not the fragile kind I once clung to, but a grounded, deliberate peace built on truth and self-respect. Looking back now, I understand something I couldn't grasp before. Revenge didn't free me. It simply cleared the path. What freed me was choosing myself, fully, unapologetically, and without fear. My story may sound dramatic, but betrayal like mine happens in quiet homes and quiet hearts every day. Maybe you're listening because you've been wronged too. Maybe you're listening because you're still healing. Or maybe you're listening because you're standing at the edge of your own turning point, unsure of what comes next. So let me ask you something I had to ask myself long before I found the courage to walk away. When someone tries to take everything from you, how far will you go to take yourself back? Because sometimes reclaiming your life isn't about revenge. Sometimes it's about finally choosing to rise.